From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Shari. Wow, have I got a reaction to that interview that just took place on Shari's program? I know that Dr. Jamal Rifi's a good and decent man and he is the messenger, but, well, a couple of deep breaths and I'll get to a response to that in a moment or two's time. But, of course, the feeling, and I know that if you're watching in other places apart from Sydney, it may not feel as intense, but certainly we know that in Sydney there's the ongoing fear, concern, something significant has happened. We all know that, of course, after Bondi and after what happened just a couple of nights ago. But something out of the ordinary, not just normal crimes, not just something you quickly move on from. I mean, literally, not even a week after what took place in Bondi, the 6 people who died, the dozen or so people whose lives have changed forever because of their injuries. There's a memorial which is being set up there now. There'll be a day of remembrance in a couple of days' time, and there are still tears that are flowing. This is not just an ordinary crime, it was an extraordinary event.
It's terrible. It shouldn't happen like this. I'm always shopping here.
Painting a picture, telling far more than 1,000 words.
Really sad. It's happening to our beautiful community because some of them, they are our friends.
Now, you know that I've been around the media long enough to tell you how the sausage is made, and sometimes there are times when the media just keeps squeezing an event because they know there's attention in it. This is different. This is genuinely different. There are still so many elements of this that are yet to play out. We haven't heard from all of the families. All we've heard is just the names of the people that have passed on. We've not heard the story of the people that were injured. So let alone, again, the people that were in the centre. It is the heart of the community. So it's an absolute open wound emotionally in that part of Sydney. And, of course, there's the situation that we covered live here on Monday night, we reacted to last night, and it still is not even beginning to heal. There's still a festering emotional wound in Western Sydney after the stabbing of the bishop.
People are now scared of one another, which we shouldn't be, you know. I am concerned, I am sad. We need to ensure that people feel safe, to feel that they can live here, can practice their faith in a safe environment.
The point I'm trying to make at the top of the show is that I know that when you watch all of the primetime shows back to back to back to back to back, you may feel sometimes, oh, hang on, I've seen that before, I've seen this before. But of course there are people who sort of come in and out for certain shows, but on top of what we do here each and every night, I understand that if you sit there and watch TV all day, or you've read everything that there is in the paper, it feels a little bit overwhelming. And at times, yes, of course, when you're reading all of these sorts of coverages, there's only a slight difference in new information this hour versus the next day. But while obviously not as cataclysmic or having the death tolls of things like Bali bombings or planes flying into buildings or horrific events that happen all day, every day, these are not normal crimes. These are not normal things that the country's biggest city, and by extension the rest of the country watching on, have just quickly moved through. Which is why I have been so critical of the Prime Minister, who seems to have an attitude towards this that, well, act as if everything is normal. Well, you and I know not everything is normal. Now, yes, we can intellectualise that Bondi is a one-off, and we can intellectualise that the stabbing is a one-off, but the reality is of the types of crimes that are before us, it jolts us, it changes us. Now, last night I had a go at the PM because we know he's a public speaker who has been elected by his local community many, many times over the decades, his own party having faith in him as a minister, a shadow minister, elevating him to the leader of the Labor Party, and then, of course, winning a federal election. The guy knows how to do public speaking. As we showed you yesterday, he's constantly checking his notes while making the points about unification, not going out of his way to say what is explicitly not acceptable, and also, in my view, missing the moment to show how significant this time is. Now, I know that there are some people, for whatever reason, who want to just quick move on to the next thing, right? What's the next adrenaline hit? What's the next dopamine explosion of this news story or that news story? But this one is going to take a few days to get through the system. Yet the Prime Minister is not getting that message. As I said, he speaks passionately and off the cuff and down the camera lens when he wants to about a law passing or not passing through the Parliament. The righteous indignation of the behaviours that he disagreed with about the former federal government. Well, no righteous indignation in this scenario because, again, he is under the misapprehension that it's all kind of normal, right? Don't worry, it's so few and far between, let's not pretend. But of course, again, and I say for the third time, because of the type of thing that this is, it feels different. Because everyone can supplement themselves for the people at a shopping centre, and people of faith can supplement themselves for the person of whom they entrust with their faith at the front of their place of worship. So the Prime Minister had another shot today, but he blew it so badly. Now, I want him to get it right because while I'm not going to vote for him and I'm hardly going to cheer him at any time, he's the one in charge and he's the one who's got to try to hold 27 million people together. Instead, today there was nothing special. No special calling together of security leaders for it to be seen sitting around a cabinet table. No pulling together of faith leaders to be seen to be trying to express what the majority and extreme majority view is in Australia of how unacceptable this stuff has been. Instead, he was off like it was an election campaign, and today wearing the high vis and the hard hat, he's just moved straight on. Well, that was Saturday, that was Sunday, that was Monday. Now it's Wednesday and I want to go to Queensland and talk about a future made in Australia. Does this look like somebody who is understanding the moment that we are in? Now again, will we be in this moment next week? Not really. 2 weeks? Not really. But this week, this is what it's about. Yet the Prime Minister, again, was out and about today looking like he was on the campaign trail, not a person who was using his immense power to show that he is doing something.
Violent extremism has no place in this country. Violence has no place in this country. Our police need to be respected at all times, and people should allow them to go about their job. These are men and women who put themselves at risk in order to keep us safe.
You may also notice that somebody who is not serious right now, and I know that it's so easy when something's not in your jurisdiction, but it's your fellow Australian and it could just as easily be Chermside. Have a look at the Queensland Premier while the Prime Minister is making this statement. Now, the Prime Minister could have done his press conference today and said no questions about the security stuff and then go outside and take off the high vis and just do it with a suit jacket on. But Stephen Miles looks like some sort of irritated kid, let alone when the Prime Minister was actually making his statement, he was clearly looking at something on his phone. Now, I trust that the people in charge of our cities and our states and our countries are decent people, and I do not question that decency. But I absolutely think that they have shown us that they don't get the seriousness and the gravity of what is happening in our country right now. Now, that scares me. Not because they, by doing this, tacitly endorse what has happened, but it means without the focus and action and passion to try to reassure people that the people in charge are doing something differently this week than they were doing last week. Instead, the message that's being sent is, yeah, terrible thing, just like the Easter road toll, but, you know, bigger fish to fry. Well, that's not the case this week. It's not just a Sydney thing. It really isn't. Because the reality is that the cultural makeups, the cultural tensions, the mental illness problems that we've seen from Bondi to Fairfield exist everywhere else. In fact, in many regional areas too. So again, the Prime Minister, who I know cannot stand the sound of my voice or anything I have to say, but for goodness sake, could somebody please tell him to do it differently and not just think it's another Wednesday where we go off and do press conferences in hard hats because we're trying to change the subject. You don't need to change the subject, you just need to deal with the reality of a country that is hurting in big parts right now. Now, to the situation that we've been dealing with for a couple of days on the other side of Sydney, that being, of course, the stabbing of the religious leader in Fairfield. Now, in the same way that we have an understanding of the pain that the parents of the Bondi killer would be feeling, they obviously did not endorse, they obviously did not encourage the behaviour of their son, and they have a right to be heard because they are part of the picture, not just the story, part of the reality, as it does need to be that the parents of the teenager who is accused in the crime in the church in Fairfield, they too need to be heard. Now, we understand that those family members are quite concerned, particularly because, of course, there was that mob that in the hours afterwards was wildly out of control. More police officers were assaulted and hurt on Monday in Fairfield than it was in Bondi on Saturday. And there is great shock and fear and a whole collection of other emotions that are playing as a result of that. And out of respect to trying to understand where a parent would be, because, God forbid, forgive me, you know I'm an atheist, but it's the term that applies, God forbid that any of us would end up in the same scenario about a family member that we just could not control or did not have control of or certainly don't have responsibility of at a certain age. Well, we learn today that through a spokesman, now I don't know whether the spokesman who spoke to the Australian newspaper is the same spokesperson that you saw on television tonight, but let's assume that they are two different people. The spokesperson said that they believed that he was just a child and that he suffers from anger outbursts. He'd been left confused about the designation of all of this as a terrorist attack, that being the family members. Their belief is that the police were too quick to make this decision. The parents say that their son was gentle but was prone to anger outbursts. His behaviour has not improved with counselling, believing that he suffered from an undiagnosed autism spectrum disorder. Now, another person who is deeply respected across Sydney is Dr. Jamal Rifi. He is a man who, of course, is at the front lines of the Islamic community in Sydney. It is part of the Australia that is the modern Australia, and he has taken on the task of now continuing to speak publicly on the family's behalf. Now, he just spoke with Sharri Markson. As much of the conversation as we can legally put up is at skynews.com.au. Why do we say that? Because, of course, there is a criminal process which is about to begin, and we are in this limbo period between the event taking place, the police having him in custody, and whether or not there will be a formal charging process. So that's why the caution is being used in the type of information that we can show you. But Jamal sat down and had a conversation with Sharri, and there's, again, he passes on what he believes to be a concern in Western Sydney. Presumably, by that he means the Islamic members of the Western Sydney community, that the police were too quick to move this to a scenario of terrorism. And put simply, Bondi, where 6 people died, as opposed to Fairfield, where somebody was significantly injured, multiple people were significantly injured. Why would the scenario where it was in Fairfield that became declared a terrorist attack, but what happened in Bondi was not? Hence why he made this comment in the middle of the interview.
The tale of two cities. So a perpetrator in Bondi will be treated differently than a perpetrator in Fairfield. Except on a personal level, I understand that the police would be overwhelmed with the terrible event that took place in Bondi, and they needed to unlock extra powers to get the help from the ASIO and the AFP and the Commonwealth government. So there is, I understand, there is a difference between the two, but unfortunately, the overwhelming feeling in the community that it is, tales of two cities.
Okay, we're going to nip this one in the bud and do it right now. Now, for all the conversations about misinformation and all the rest of it, this sense that Fairfield has been treated differently than Bondi is at the heart of misinformation. The stronger words I will not use because we're all trying to keep things at a calmer level. But the police made the decision the morning after what happened on Monday night that this was terrorism because of the video that was taken of the teenager who is alleged to have been the attacker. Now, during the interview that we've aired here with Dr. Riffy, there's no suggestion that there's been a problem with the translation of the video of what the teenager was saying, but this is what he said after the alleged attack took place.
ناس بس ليش عم بيسب رسولي ما كنت جيت لهون اذا عم بيدخل حلب ديني ما كنت جيت لهون بس هو عم يدخل حلب ديني هي دين اذا هو حكى هي دين الشيطان مالتك حبيبي روح على شيطانك شوف شو يسوي عليك اذا هو بس حكى على دينه ما كنت جيت.
Two absolute references to religion and two absolute references to an insult based through religion. So again, because of the criminal process that plays out, there's only so far I can go with my words, but it's fairly obvious why police made the distinction there. In Bondi, if there is a diary entry, a social media post, a comment that he made 24 hours, that will give us any information about the motivation as to why 6 people died in Bondi, then that too may get changed in its declaration. Now, that's what's happening right now. There is not a scenario in Sydney where what happened in the eastern suburbs is being treated differently than what happened in the western suburbs. And we need everyone who is trusted by people in the communities that are starting to have that belief to be disavowed of it. Now, I get it, we're dealing with things that are complicated, but we also can't play the kick gloves game where common sense is not going to be applied and people are going to put opinions into the air that are just outright wrong. Now again, Shari's show, brilliant tonight. She had a conversation with a former high-ranking police officer in New South Wales who explained how they make the declaration. Now, the declaration isn't just a wave of the hand or a reaction to what they see on television. It's multiple officers who put the information together, discuss it, it then makes its way up and through to the police commissioner, and the police commissioner then makes that assessment. Now, based on the publicly available information, that video that we've shown you and the translation of it would be a fairly significant part as to why they made that decision. Now again, I want nothing but calm. I want nothing but respect for the people who are innocent and the parents are innocent. the actions of the child who lives in their house or the son who has been long gone from their house are not their responsibility. And just as madness is involved in the highest of profile violent crimes, that is indeed what is applicable here, regardless of whether it was the East or the West or plenty more in between. But we are in a very serious time, very serious things where the reaction is going to be particularly difficult. But one thing that has also been made very clear is that there is fear from other members in the Islamic community that the teenager become radicalised by things on the internet. Now, we have had this conversation for 20 years in Australia about the wild and crazy stuff that people can send themselves crazy with that exists on the internet. Now, I know right now that there's a Senate inquiry where the Greens et al. Are trying to pretend that it's far right-wing terrorism is the only thing for us to deal with in Australia, but all of that crazy stuff needs to be purged from the internet in Australia. But all of the radical preacher stuff should be too. Instead, much of the stuff that has raised eyebrows and dropped jaws in the past 6 months that's being said in and around religious ceremonies in Western Sydney is all still out there on the internet. Instead, again, an example about the lack of seriousness from the government, about what the Prime Minister should be publicly saying rather than just walking around today like it's another day in an election campaign, high vis and hard hats on. It's not another day in paradise, all right? He needs to reassure us that everything is being done to purge this garbage off the internet. But of course we know that a government is focused on only really purging one thing at the moment off the internet, and sadly it's not extremist opinion. Instead, it's the stuff that they are literally pushing a law through the parliament now on that's about narratives they disagree with.
Misinformation.
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 The misinformation which is there.
Some misinformation.
All right, now to Big Australia, even more proof that no matter how much you don't want it, it is happening, and no matter what they say, it is still happening. Now, it doesn't matter. Every time this issue is polled, time and time again, about the number of people that are coming into Australia, Australians strongly, 50% and above, say no, things are too high. There's this poll that was in the Sydney Morning Herald. There's this poll that the IPA put out. There's this article in the freaking Economist. And there's even this Twitter poll on Q&A. Every single time people are asked, it comes back. We're pro-immigration. We don't care where you come from. As long as you trust the rules and norms of this society, welcome in, enjoy yourself. But we know that the numbers were way too high last year. Too many people is too much pressure on things like the housing supply. And we were told by this government in December of last year, oh no, we're pulling our head in. This year was a little bit too crazy, a little bit too much. Find some way to blame Scott Morrison for it, but we've got it all now back under control. In fact, this is what Clueless Claire O'Neill said.
One of the goals of our agenda here is to bring migration numbers back to normal.
But of course, despite the words, despite whatever decisions they say they've made, the reality is that we can go off the numbers that are being produced by the Bureau of Statistics, all right? Not some far right-wing think tank, not wishful thinking from their political opponents. But as the Telegraph wrote, in January, figures released on Thursday by the Bureau of Statistics revealed 125,000 permanent and long-term arrivals landed in Australia in January, the highest on record. In fact, it was also the highest number since 2009. Well, now we can talk about February. Daily Mail's headline, Australia hits worrying new milestone as more than 100,000 foreigners arrive in 1 month for the first time ever and a housing crisis worsens. Again, where are they getting their info from? February's net intake of permanent and long-term arrivals was 105,000, almost double January's level, according to the new Bureau of Statistics data. Now, this has led to, among others, the Lord Mayor of Brisbane, freshly re-elected Adrian Schrinner, Now, he took the extraordinary step, literally 2 days ago, I think he was at a citizenship ceremony, but now on Instagram, he's copying it because he says, under this picture, for the first time ever, permanent and long-term migration has added more than 100,000 people to Australia's population in a single month. This is his post that was up on Instagram. His quotes, by any reasonable measure, 100,000 people in 1 month is simply too many, too soon. It's like adding 2 full Suncorp stadiums to the population every single month. Despite welcoming many generations of migrants, Australians have never seen this many people arrive in such a short period of time. It's time for the federal government to regain control of our immigration system and to ensure that local communities are adequately funded so they can catch their breath and that they can catch up to demand. He happily welcomes more people when the federal government is able to actually deal with this. He goes on to talk about local government and also the issues when it comes to stamp duty. I mean, these are the issues that are happening right now. And finally, before we get to our debate, I've got to almost do a daily conversation about Donald Trump, but we've got some very special guests tonight. Looking forward to Joe Hildebrand here, Matt Canavan is here, Megyn Kelly in a moment or two's time. But Donald Trump on his way to court, second day, obviously at about midnight, each and every night, Australian Eastern time, is when he goes into court, just a little bit before that, about half an hour before that. If you want to see his actual comments, they're streamed live online, or most likely they'll be shown here each and every night. Well, as you can see, there are lots of reporters that are out the front of the court. Apparently, the best part of, 500 members of the media are apparently there. And they are bored witless. Now, of course, this thing isn't being televised, but there's an insatiable appetite for everyone to know every single second and every single thing that's happening inside the room. But right now, of course, all that's happening, I mean, it's one of the most significant parts of the case, but hundreds and hundreds of people are being whittled down to 18 people who will eventually be the 12 jurors and 6 alternates that will decide whether the case being brought about the accounting of the money, not the hush money payment itself, is going to be found guilty or not as a felony. But they are just filling their time with anything they can, including turning celebrities or mini-celebrities into people who have just said, oh, sorry, I can't do jury duty because I can't take that much time off work. Have a look at this on MSNBC about just how drooling they were about any information. Like, did Donald Trump mention me?
What was that like answering questions, including some about Donald Trump, as he is sitting 30 feet from you?
It was odd. It was such an interesting experience because I had never seen him in person before, and you see someone blown up so larger than life on the media for so many years. To see them in person is very jarring, and you get the sense that it's like, oh, this is just another guy. And also he sees me talking about him, which is bizarre.
Did you make eye contact with him?
Yes.
Oh! So have they worked? Is this guy Hitler, or is he the football captain they'd all like to date? Because the obsessiveness about every little movement is quite odd. Our dear friend Megyn Kelly, we'll have some fun with this a little bit later in the show, but she's particularly amused by just how Mills and Boone some of the coverage is about what Trump is and isn't doing in every second of while he's waiting for the 18 people to be selected to form the jury.
This from the Washington Post. As the questioning of potential jurors continued, Trump at one point looked at something on his lawyer's phone. His reaction was not clear. Later, Trump's eyes closed again.
It's so creepy. It's so weird. And Megyn brings it to us in beautiful detail. Some fun with Megyn Kelly about something that's very serious, but also very stupid at the same time. We'll get to the lovely lady in a few moments' time. But next, a debate. Plenty to talk about, plenty to discuss. Is the Prime Minister actually doing enough? What am I missing? We'll have this conversation with, among others, Matt Canavan, who also wants to talk about the nature positive stuff, which, surprise, surprise, the government decided to release while everyone was paying attention to what was happening in Sydney the past couple of days, from Bondi to Fairfield, and Joe Hildebrand, who knows what Albo thinks before he does. Next. Thanks very much for watching. Let's get into the chat right now. Joe Hildebrand, again, he knows what Albo thinks before Albo does. And none other than the great Matt Canavan, who was, of course, the Senator from Queensland and a passionate Nationals man. All right, let's chat about a few things. The one without notice, then the one that I was planning for here, Joe.
Yes.
Which is, I'm frustrated. Look, again, we all know I'm no fan. We all know that I'm not going to be cheering this bloke in as the Prime Minister. However, there are moments when Prime Ministers have to respond to something that was never the plan, never part of the plan. That's where we are right now. And I'm sure that people are pouring something in his ear saying, oh, we'll just kind of act on as normal, right? But the idea that we're off to Brisbane for a funding announcement looking like an election. Yesterday we're reading from the notes as opposed to a couple of days in a row of footage from the cabinet table of him pulling the people together, ringing the e-safety commissioner and saying, get rid of the hate preachers, get rid of the far right stuff. Instead, I feel that he thinks this happened on Saturday, this happened on Monday.
Yeah, I think he's been pretty strong on it. I think his words are heartfelt. I don't think he's looking down at his notes to find out what he's meant to say next. I think he's just sort of pausing and just reflecting on what he's saying because it is. I mean, I think he is genuine. He's a genuine guy. I know he's genuine, in fact. And while I understand that for some people there will just never be enough outpouring, and I know how viscerally it's affected a lot of people, and I've obviously, spent all week just trying to make sense of it, and had people, like I've got my editor and people in the community obviously just saying, can you just write something to make sense of all this? And I'm like, I can't make sense. I'm struggling to make sense of it myself. The point. And so we're trying to do that. And
people are wrestling with smoke.
And I think
I don't think the PM's.
And I think people really do want that. And I think it's viscerally affected Sydney, as you rightly said, and I think you see from the response of Chris Minns, this is someone who really feels it and really gets it. And I know that while Albo is obviously himself from Sydney, born and bred, he is still the Prime Minister of a whole country, and a country that has not been as shaken by this as Sydney has. Defence is important. Manufacturing is important.
Of course it is.
Government has to go on.
Yes, but we certainly know that I think they'd be playing it slightly differently if they wanted to, but I think there's a deliberate choice not to. Matt, again, you're somebody who understands why all of this matters, but again, and I absolutely understand that the further you get away from anything traumatic that takes place, it's, look, that's terrible, but anyway, we move on. Do you think the PM, again, just is just missing that sweet spot, and whether it's sort of, again, this impossible Goldilocks position you're supposed to be in, but when horrible things happen that make people feel like they aren't living in the country that they believe they live in, then I think you have to reassure them and not just say it once and then move on to the next press release.
Look, Paul, I find myself in the position of a bit hard to comment. I have been stuck chairing Senate committees for the past 3 days in a row, and I really haven't been able to see everything the Prime Minister has said, so I don't feel like I'm in a position to run a running commentary on his performance in that regard. Look, it's a terrible time, as Joe said. I can completely understand the anxiety and tension that people feel in Sydney. Despite not being able to follow most of the media, I have been impressed with the Premier of New South Wales, Chris Minns, from what the limited bits I have seen. So while I'm, not going to throw the Prime Minister down a river that I haven't been journeying on myself, I suppose I haven't seen a lot of impact from whatever he has said. But look, it's a tough time for all Australians. I'm very confident and optimistic that we will recover from this, and that we will find those bits of these tragedies that were redeeming features, the bravery, the courage in Bondi Junction, the forgiveness of the priest, of the bishop, to his assailant just moments after the attack. So there's some elements there that we'll take away, and we'll become stronger as a nation as we get through this, I'm sure.
Now, another thing the Prime Minister was being asked about on the radio a couple of days ago was the relentless, horrific, awful, unacceptable, disgusting beat of the death of women in Australia at the hands of people that they don't know, in the case of Bondi, or in the case of people that they know far too frequently. We all know what the statistics are. But there was a comment the Prime Minister made that I really want to have a sombre chat about here, where he says, violence against women is far too prevalent, whether it's in Ballarat. He says that men are overwhelmingly the perpetrators, and he goes on to say this.
Women shouldn't feel like they have to change their behaviour, that they shouldn't be, they shouldn't be able to walk home from the train station or the bus stop at night. Men as a group have to change their behaviour. We have to be prepared to speak out about these issues.
Now, Matt, I've taken a vow of no swearing with my bosses, but sometimes I kind of go fruits cake about some of this stuff because anyone that's responsible for the violence against another human being, let alone against women, like we all couldn't be more disgusted by, right? There's no tacit approval that happens in our friendship groups. There's no sort of soft eye rolls. It is a bloody outrage. If we could seek the physical vengeance on the people who do harm to the women in our lives, we would do it. I don't know why the PM always goes to this place. Men as a whole, they need to change themselves. It always sits very poorly with me because I'm going to repeat what I think we said a couple of weeks ago. I would die for the women in my life, and so would you, and so would Joe.
Look, absolutely, and I do agree with the Prime Minister. It's absolutely unacceptable that in our modern society, many women don't feel or can't walk around safely at any time of the day. It's an atrocious element of our modern world. But I know where you're coming from too, that, well, number one, the Prime Minister uses as sort of collective guilt here to say that somehow men as a group are responsible for this. I mean, substitute the word men with other genders or different ethnic groups and imagine 100%. How that would be received or go down. It is not men as a group that's causing this issue. It is some men, absolutely. And the problem we have is that, as you and I know, whatever the Prime Minister says, whatever you and I say, words alone are not going to get through the thick skulls of those some men. They're not watching Paul Murray Live tonight. They're not listening on tenterhooks to every word of the Prime Minister. And we've gone through this performative act over the past couple of decades where premiers, political leaders feel that they've done some solemn duty by giving these performative speeches and think that they can wash their hands, it's all gone away. The situation we've found ourselves in is because we have a broken society. We have broken families, we have welfare-dependent communities, we have rampant drugs and crime, and that's why we've ended up where we are. And those things can't be fixed through a speech or some fine, nice words. There's a hard action there of having to respond to cleaning up the mess that modern society has become for many people. And as I say, that's going to take hard work, but I'd prefer the Prime Minister focus on that than starting to lay blame or think through a few speeches and encouragement that we could fix this terrible, terrible problem.
Now, like you, Joe, I've had dear friends, women saying to me, you take it more seriously, understand it more, talk about it more on television. But I just want to answer again from that male perspective, right, which is that I refuse to believe that there's a dormant inside every man rapist or murderer. I do not believe that to be the case.
You are correct. I, too, take this extremely seriously to the point where I have been very outspoken about the contributing factors to domestic violence, and I have, as you can imagine, and as you perhaps have seen, have been absolutely excoriated by it. Excoriated, ironically, by so-called feminists who hang out with some very questionable gentlemen themselves. I'm going to read you something that comes from the Australian Institute of Criminology. 5 years ago, they put out a groundbreaking report, and it opened with this extraordinary statement. Now, consider the amount of talk about domestic violence and what causes it, and men need to do better. This is how it opened its report. Now, this was a study of, I think, 3,000 records and 300 papers, and it opened it with this comment. To our knowledge, there has been no attempt, not little attempt, not enough attempt, no attempt to develop a comprehensive understanding of what characterises domestic violence offenders and offending across Australia. In other words, what are the driving factors? What are the causes behind it? What are the contributing factors? No attempt. This is 2019. I mean, all the talk up until that point, no attempt. No one's actually tried to pull together the figures. And what they found was that about 2% of men, 2% of repeat offenders were responsible for about half of all incidents. So that's 2% of men responsible for half of incidents. That was from a 2016 study. It cited another in a 2017 Northern Territory study found that 8% of couples accounted for 27% of the harm associated with domestic violence. So again, when you see these statistics and you see these numbers, it is not all men doing it to all women all the time. It is a very small number of men, a very small number of terrible men doing it over and over and over again. Once you're a wife basher, chances are you are always a wife basher. It found that disadvantage was a driving factor. Alcohol is a driving factor. Again, recidivism, repeat offenders, a driving factor. And tragically, it was a much higher, as we know, as anyone who has studied this knows, there is a much higher incidence in Indigenous communities. So there's no point saying, hey, men, just do better. Otherwise, you could just say, hey, everybody, just say no to terrorism.
Yeah.
Hey, kids, don't rob banks. Yeah. We know how stupid that is about other serious crimes. If we're going to treat domestic violence like terrorism, as people say we should, well, then treat it like terrorism and don't think that a nice little campaign saying...
In the same way you would say all insert needs to change. Very good point. You'd be quite targeted. Thank you, lads. I really do appreciate it. And again, I look forward to all of the criticisms. Please send them to the usual places. I'm sure Malcolm will read each and every one of your letters. More in a sec. Our favourite time of the week and our favourite lady in the world, none other than the great Megyn Kelly, joining us now from the United States. You can see her show on YouTube or listen to it on Sirius XM in the United States. Now, Megyn, I've heard your commentary about the early days of the Trump trial, and the trial itself has really annoyed you.
Oh, I mean, there's so much to this Trump trial already. You know, we're day 2 and it's already jam-packed of elements to discuss. Yes, I'm genuinely upset about what's happening to him because it's not just happening to Trump. It's happening to us. It's happening to America. You and I have been talking about this for the better part of a year now since he got indicted. It really was a before and after moment for America. We went 250 years without doing this to anybody, and here we go. And over what again? What? An expired misdemeanor that he didn't write down properly in the corporate books, that what he paid to Michael Cohen, his lawyer, was in fact a reimbursement for a hush money payment to a porn star with whom he allegedly had a tryst. That's it. For that, we broke this precedent. And now it's led to this. I mean, so much is out of control now. That's the reason we're having a separate Supreme Court hearing on whether a president is entirely immune from criminal indictments when he's president or thereafter. All of this has been set in motion thanks to this one partisan hack, Alvin Bragg, the DA of Manhattan, who ran promising to get Trump. Now here we are having to take this nonsense seriously, having a gag order imposed on Trump, saying you're not allowed to criticize the witnesses, even though they're all over cable news, in a documentary film and so on, criticizing him every day. And the argument is, well, he's just so powerful. Well, he has such reach. You know, that's because you indicted a president. That's what happens. It's one of the many reasons we never did this before, because sure, he has a very large bully pulpit because he was president, but you can't indict him and then say, oh, we need to forget all about your power when it works to your advantage. It only gets mentioned when it works to our advantage. And look, the future of the United States in some ways lies in the balance here. We are now 7 jurors have been selected out of the 12 as of this hour. They're going to select another 5, and then they're going to need 6 alternates. This thing's going at lightning speed. This judge wants this thing done. He does not want to let Trump delay it because nobody thinks it's going to last past November. So that's not what this one's about, this delay. But the other trials can't begin until this one's done. Every minute Trump is sitting on this witness stand or in this courtroom is one that he cannot be dragged into one of the other trials. And the Democrats will admit, I saw one of Barack Obama's senior advisors on CNN earlier today, that they all realize this is the weakest case and the one that people are least troubled by. So they want a conviction and they want to move past it and they want to get into one of those federal trials or the Fani Willis trial in Atlanta. And listen, the election interference is part of it. This whole past week, Donald Trump's sitting in the courtroom. Joe Biden's been in Pennsylvania, one of the biggest swing states there is. The election interference has already begun. And so if this works and they keep Trump off the campaign trail and they get the likely conviction that they're probably going to get, and they really do appeal to those independents and Republicans who say, it does matter to me, I wouldn't vote for a convicted felon, then we are off to the races in a very dark way when it comes to November 2024.
We all know that, Trump drives clicks and viewers and all the rest of it, and without him, imagine there'd be no CNN and MSNBC would just disappear. No threat to democracy. But nothing's happening. I mean, the first couple of days are very procedural. They're about deciding which people are going to be on the jury, but even then, both sides have got 10 opportunities to bounce somebody off the jury. And I even noticed there was an interview today with one of the people who had been booted off the jury, but they were so excited at MSNBC because what was it like to be in the room with Trump?
Oh my God, it is unbelievable. The weird love-hate relationship that the media has with Trump is on full display. So you're right. There's not much to cover. It's just jury selection. So what can you really say? No evidence is being introduced, and Trump just has to sit there like a bump on a log while the lawyers and the jurors and the judge do all the work. Well, they've found a way, because it's not interesting unless it's about Trump. They have found a way. I give you this from the Washington Post. As the questioning of potential jurors continued, Trump at one point looked at something on his lawyer's phone. His reaction was not clear. Later, Trump's eyes closed again and his head occasionally dipped. Get a hold of yourself. He looked down. That's your story. Your whole story that you said in 70 words was, he looked down. This is what they're transforming this trial into already. And, we talked earlier privately about this one potential juror who was out on the sidewalk, and the anchors were talking to her like, oh, you were in there? You saw him? How close were you? Oh, you realize, he's a man. He's, he's famous, sure, but, there are a lot of famous people in New York. Generally, we New Yorkers pride ourselves on not getting too excited about them when we see them in real life. They're within 12 feet of us, but they can't contain themselves. It's humiliating to watch. So I don't know what we're going to have in store for us when they actually have witnesses taking the stand. I think it's going to be further evidence of the media beclowning themselves. However, I do want to say one thing about the jury. I think we're already being misled because they've selected now, as I say, 7 jurors thus far. And they're not allowed to ask the jurors would-be how they voted, but they can ask proxies for that. For example, what TV news do you watch? What newspapers do you have delivered to your home? And then one of the guys who made it on the jury says he watches MSNBC and Fox and gets the New York Times delivered to his house. All right. That's a lie. I'm just going to go right ahead and say he's lying. He does not watch MSNBC and Fox. You and I are the only 2 people who watch both MSNBC and Fox because it's our business. We have to know what's happening on the various media channels left and right. The regular civilians don't do that unless they're hate watching. Okay, I could buy that, one of them. And the fact that he gets the New York Times delivered to his house and reads that and not the Wall Street Journal or the New York Post, which is everybody's favorite newspaper, tells us that he's lying about the Fox News part. Anyway, he made it on the jury. We're seeing a lot of this. So far, I think it's 4 men and 3 women. I guess that's somewhat better for Trump because women don't love Trump. I mean, certainly not in New York. So if I were representing Trump, I'd want to keep as many women off as I could. There's one nurse, female, who works at Sloan Kettering. So instead of dealing with cancer patients for 6 to 8 weeks, helping them, she's got to sit here and decide whether Trump banged a porn star and then didn't document the hush money properly. I mean, this is an absurd waste of everybody's time. But, we have to get Trump and stop Trump. So, pro-democracy, yay, 2024.
That's our show for tonight. Thank you very much. Now, we are going to be taking the Our Town Road train all the way to beautiful Renmark in South Australia. If you would like to join us in a couple of Sundays' time on the 26th of April, please send me an email, ourtown@skynews.com.au. Looking forward to seeing Renmark in a couple of weeks and the late debate right now.
Go